Hi, and welcome to a Cloud Developer channel. In today's video, I want to talk about PowerShell modules. Specific items we're going to touch on are creation of a basic folder structure for a module. We're going to go ahead and create a module metadata file. We're going to create some helper functions. Then we're going to generate a main module file that's going to be invoking those helper functions as well as the actual logic of the actual module itself. We're going to show you how to export some of the actual functions that are available to the end user from the module. And then we're going to show you a basic demo of how to use that new module. So let's go ahead and get started. So what I have here is I have my folder that I've created from before, and in this folder I actually have a logging script that I've created before in a prior video about PowerShell. And I have a modules folder. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is create a folder called PS common logging. In this folder, I am going to go ahead and right click and click open with code, and this is Visual Studio Code. And I'll go ahead and create a new file, and I'll call this a ps.common logging ps1, and that's going to be the PowerShell module main file. So ps common logging ps1. And Visual Studio Code will automatically know to open up a terminal session because this is a PowerShell file. And one of the first things I'm going to actually do is I'm going to go ahead and create two folders called private and public, as well as I'm going to generate a PowerShell metadata file. So let me do that first. And then in order to generate the metadata file, there's actually a function in PowerShell that's called new module metadata. I'm sorry, manifest. And it's going to ask you for the path. Now this is going to be a path to the actual metadata file. Basically it's asking you for the name of the file that you want to create. So I'll call this ps common logging psd1. And when it actually finishes, it will create this file for you. So I'll go ahead and replace a couple of things here. And I'll do this in a couple other places where it actually has my username listed out, and I want to replace that with whatever you want to give the name as the copyright statement, etc. So once I did that, now what I want to be able to do is go ahead and give it a description. Common logging module by clouddeveloper.io. And then another thing I'm going to do is actually specify what kind of functions I want to be able to export. And this is actually important because you don't want to actually export all of the functions in your module, as some of them are internal, and if other functions have the same name, if you end up exporting everything that you're using, then there could be collisions in the names of the functions, and you can start running into problems. Now, the way I want to do that is actually not through this file, but there's actually a function in PowerShell you can invoke from the individual files within your module to be able to specify which functions you actually want to be able to export. So I'll show you how to do that. So for the time being, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually comment this out so it doesn't interfere with that process for me. And you can also specify the project URI, which is basically the URL. For example, if you're creating a module and you're going to host it on GitHub, or if you actually have your own website where you want to host it, you can go ahead and provide this information, which makes it easier for other people who are going to be using your module to be able to obtain additional information about your module. But in this case, I don't have that information, so I'll go ahead and close this file. So the next thing I want to actually be able to do is start creating a couple of files here. They're going to be helpful for me. So inside of the private folder, I'm going to create a file called helper functions ps1. And then in the public folder, I'm going to create a file called logging ps1. And then you can create more files and load them as you need to. But in this case, this is all I need for this purpose of this module. Then the next item that I want to be able to do is actually go ahead and put logic in here to be able to load the actual files within this module, so that as I add files and remove files, I don't actually want to constantly have to do that. So, and the way you would do that is by creating a variable, and I'll call this public files, and I'll go ahead and actually make a call to get child item, and then I'll use ps script root / public / star.ps1, and this will actually grab all the files inside of the public folder. And then here I'm going to specify private files, and it's going to be in a private folder. So now that I have this here, what I want to be able to do is actually go through each one of these arrays of objects and actually go ahead and load them into memory for the module to be able to use. So the way you do that is by doing public files plus private files, and I'll do a pipe, and then I'll use a shortcut for each. And then here, what I'm going to do is create another variable called script, and this is going to be useful when I actually have a try-catch statement, because the $_ which is representing each object in the array that I'm going to be iterating over, in a try-catch statement actually replaces that with an exception in the catch block. So that's why I need to actually turn it into a different variable. So and then I'll create my try-catch statement, and here what I'll do is I'll write verbose, as I want to actually be able to output the information about the module. And I'm going to say importing module file, and I'll say script full name, and this is just going to output the fact that it's actually importing that module. And then I'm going to what's called a .source a particular file, which is a way to be able to actually import that given file for the module to be able to start using in the PowerShell environment. So I'll just say full name, and this is enough to be able to do that. So in an actual catch statement, however, I want to be able to say write error and say fail to import module file, and I'm gonna specify that the module file itself was script full name, and the error that I want to be able to output is now going to be specified by the $_ and this is what is going to actually output the error for me. So I'm going to go ahead and do verbose, and this actually should be enough for me to start loading the module. Now the other couple of things that I want to be able to do is I want to actually have an initialization function, and I'll call this initialize ps log module, and then here I'll be able to put information about specifically things that are related to my module settings or anything like that that I want to be able to set up. Now I don't have anything there right now, but I do want to set it up so that I don't forget it later. And then as soon as I set it up, I can go ahead and call that same function so it actually runs it and all the logic inside of that. And so we're almost done in this given file. What I want to be able to do now is go into the helper functions file and go ahead and actually set this up here. So I have a couple of helpful functions in here that I need to be able to have in order for this module to work correctly. And the first one is going to be the new script frame. This is just a function that helps me build an object that I'm going to be using in my logic to build the call stack, as it's called. Basically, it's a path of the execution of a given function that this logging module will be able to obtain to be able to say this is where the actual log entry is coming from or being initiated. And this is the main purpose of this module, is to be able to provide that information. And then the actual get call sequence function, and I talked about this in my prior video, so if you'd like to see it, go ahead and watch my prior video of how do you actually create a call stack, so you could see the specific function names and even the line numbers that those functions exist within a given script. And this is actually an optimized version of that video, and the script that I put together from before that you can actually see and start using as well. So this function will return you a string that shows you what that execution path is. And then another function that I want to be able to have in here is a file name generation function. And I'm going to be using it to actually generate the file name for where I want to be able to put the log file itself. And the way it's going to be actually used is I'll go back to the logging module, and then here I'll actually put in this statement right here. So this is actually saying script colon ps log module default log path, and it invokes this get new file name function. And the purpose of that is that I can actually reference this particular variable only within my module, within my script, so that I can actually know across my entire module where I need to be able to log file or this information into a file. And there's going to be a way that I'll show you how to actually override this behavior as well. And at the end, I actually want to be able to output using verbose statements the fact that I'm actually going to be outputting the information, or this module is outputting the information into a given file. So, and you do that by writing verbose and giving it the actual variable name, so it actually puts it on a screen for you. So in this file, basically, I don't have to actually make any additional changes. So if I add additional functionality, it would automatically actually be able to use that, unless I want to change some other behavior of how I load files, and if there's any initialization logic that needs to run in addition to what I have now. So I can go ahead and close this. And then the next important thing is the actual logging ps1 file itself. And this log file, or this logging ps1 file, actually has very important functions in here. The first one is going to be the log message, and this is actually going to be one of the two public functions that are going to be exposed from this module to the end user. And it takes in the actual message and the type of a message, whether it's info, warning, or error. Then we call the get call sequence, which is actually part of the helper functions ps1 file. Then we generate the actual output that we want to see, and that is going to contain the date as well as the type information that the user might specify, the actual call sequence of how the user got to this actual function, and then the message that the user wanted to put into the actual logging mechanism. And then the last two lines are basically outputting that information to the screen, and then the last line actually is putting it into a file. And as you can see, I'm actually referencing the file that got initialized in the ps1 file, and this is how it knows where to actually write the output to. So another function that I have that I want to be able to specify here is this ps log set file path. Now you can call it whatever you want, but basically this function will allow me to override the log name that I want to be able to use in case I do not want to use the actual automatically generated file name that the module will create for me. And the way I would do that is I take in the path of the actual log file and a switch, which is basically a force. The reason I do that is because in case the file already exists, I don't actually want to assume that I can override that file or add to that file as content. So you want to make sure that the user knows what they're doing, and then they're forcing or saying, yes, it's okay to add more content, because you can actually damage some data in the files. So in this case, if the file exists and there's no force flag, it will actually error out and not allow you to update it. But if you say force, it will actually go ahead and then update that information. Now, if it doesn't exist, it will just go ahead and actually set a new file name, and you're done. So in this case, we're almost done with this file as well, and the only remaining piece that we have here is the exporting of the specific functions. So I am gonna go ahead and do that here, and what this does is basically I'm adding two function calls: export module member dash function, and then the actual function name. And as soon as I put this here, these functions became exportable and importable as well. Now, what's really important to know is if I actually did not add these functions here, or these function calls here, every single function within this module will actually be automatically imported. Now, because one of these files actually now contains explicit export statements, it will actually only export the ones that it knows about, and it's not going to actually export any other functions. Now, if you wanted to change the behavior, you can go ahead and go back to the PSD file, and then go ahead and uncomment as functions to export and specify the same function names there as well. So, and then you don't have to actually have in your logging PS1, you don't actually have to specify it here. But then it's harder for you to see, especially as your files grow, which functions are being exported and which ones are not. So that's just a convention that I like to use, but you can go ahead and use whatever works for you. So now that we actually have this completed, our module is pretty much done, and I want to be able to show you what this does and how it actually works. So what we'll do is go ahead and open up another PowerShell window. I'll go ahead and go to that folder. And here we'll just list all of the files, and the way to actually start using this module is by calling import module, and then I'll call ps, and then it's going to be the PSD1 file that we want to specify, and I want to specify the verbose flag. So I'll go ahead and run this, and in here it actually ran the import module script, and I should be able to invoke. Right. So one thing I actually forgot to do is inside of the PSD1 file, it's an important step. There's actually an attribute that's called root module, and in this one you want to actually specify the ps1 file, which is actually the module itself. And this is how the module actually knows that it needs to load this file, and then everything else actually starts working. So let's go ahead and actually remove the module once again, and actually it's removed, and we can go ahead and import the module. So now you can actually see that it's outputting the fact that it's loading the module from this given location. This is the metadata file. Then it's loading the PSM1, and then it's beginning to load the actual module files themselves. So it's loading the logging PS1, it's loading the helper functions, and then you can see that verbose message that we actually put in there to say which file are we actually going to be writing to. And if I go to this folder here, you'll notice that there's a couple other files, but the actual file that it's stated here, TMP947, is actually not here. That's because we didn't actually write any messages out yet. It just generated the file name for us. Now, the other important thing that it actually shows us is the fact that it's actually now importing the log message as well as pslog set file path functions. These are the only functions. I cannot call get, call stack, or anything like that because it was not exported. Now I can go log message, and let's specify test message 1, 2, 3, 4, and then if I want to be able to specify type, let's say error, I'll go ahead and press enter. And you can actually see that we got our timestamp, the type of a message, the function that was actually called, which is log message, which is right here, and then the line number 7. So this is where the actual log message exists itself. So, and then the message right here. So if I go back here, now you can see TMP947 exists right here, and the actual message got outputted right there. So now let's say I go in and specify something else, and I'll press enter, and then I go ahead and open it up, and you can see that actually generated a new message. And this is really useful because now I don't have to worry about where it actually logs it. As soon as you import this module, for everything that you do, as long as the module is not unloaded, that file actually gets appended to. Now, what if you actually wanted to specify a particular file? So let's take a look at how to do that. So one of the things that I can do is actually I can reuse the same file, and I can call this function that I created called pslog set file path, and then I'll give it a path, and I'll go ahead and press or copy and paste that value, and I'll press enter. As you remember before, I implemented a check to see that the file doesn't exist, but the file actually does exist, and it doesn't want you to actually override it. So let's choose another one. So let's choose this right here. So TMP D788, and in this file, let's actually delete the content, save it so we don't have anything here, and specify it here now. So if I just go ahead and paste it right here. If I do that, again, it knows that the file is there, but let's say I actually put in a force flag, and it actually took it now. So if I go ahead and run the actual log message command now, so overriding content, and I go ahead and open it up, and you can see it actually overrode the content of that file or appended to that file. So if you want to be able to use this logging module and specify your own specific file path, it's as easy as just making a call to that function and saying this is the other file that I want to be able to write to. Otherwise, it will use the default convention of temp files to be able to generate the output for you. So hopefully you found this useful. If you have any questions, feel free to leave your feedback in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video and the content of what I'm producing here, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. And if you have any feedback in terms of other content that you would like to see on this channel, please provide any feedback as well, and I'll add it to my list of things that I will be creating videos and content for. So hopefully you enjoy this, and I will see you soon. Thank you.